Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode. For this episode, to begin with, I wanted to focus on the nature of the mind and an observation I've made on it. The title arose, The Mind Activates in Accordance to the World You Access. And in the subtitle I've written, Mind is a World Accessing Technology. And so what fascinated me to talk about this really is that I noticed that most of my life I have been trying to look at my life or observe or analyze or think about my life from the context, from the perspective of a human being. And for the first time I thought, what if the mind was an engine of a greater dimension? That idea arose to me. And I thought about, okay, if we are to observe the mechanism of the mind and what happens to this. There have been many philosophers who have talked about it, but I noticed something that this episode I'm going to try to communicate. There's a story that is very important to consider. A story spoken by a man, a story about a man called Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma was one of the patriarchs of Buddhism. I believe he took Buddhism to Japan. And so the story goes that, think of it this way, the emperor, invites Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma comes into the palace, sees the emperor standing there with his council and whatnot. And so the emperor, Bodhidharma, visits the emperor, and the emperor looks at Bodhidharma and says, Bodhidharma, I have spread Buddhism. I have created many Buddhic texts, copied them, and I have created many Buddhist statues, and I've done a lot of goodness for Buddhist people and all this. What's the merit in this? And so a king is asking this from this sage called Bodhidharma, this enlightened individual. And Bodhidharma looks at him and with an intensity says, all you have done is foolishness. Imagine scolding a king. So, long story short, Bodhidharma just leaves the palace and goes outside of the palace walls, and his face inches away from the palace walls. He sits down in meditation so that even if he opens his eyes, he doesn't see anything of the samsaric realm. And the king gets angry, and the king looks at his wise councilman, and it's like, WTF, why did he respond that way? And the wise counsel of the king tell the king that it's not that what you did had no merit, but it was that you were seeking the merit, And so that's like the beginning of the story. But anyways, Bodhidharma ends up being outside of this palace staring at this wall, and he goes into samadhi, which is this very long-term meditation. And so this is the main story, where one night, Bodhidharma is in his samadhi, and this person who is troubled comes to Bodhidharma. And Bodhidharma is in samadhi, so the guy keeps trying to get Bodhidharma's attention, but Bodhidharma's not even in this reality, and the guy ends up doing something intense as the story goes. I'm just relaying this historic story, guys. This person who's troubled, who comes to this enlightened sage named Bodhidharma, he cuts off his hand as some sort of weird sign back in the day of loyalty or something. And so Bodhidharma steps out of his samadhi and pretty much says to this guy, all right, what's up? What's your problem? And the guy looks at Bodhidharma and says, Bodhidharma, my mind is restless. Please pacify my mind. And Bodhidharma stares at him and suddenly tells him, Bodhidharma says, bring your mind in front of me and I will pacify it for you. And this guy who's troubled, for the first time he begins looking for his mind, and he realizes he can't find this mind. You know, he goes into a hysteria, looks at Bodhidharma and says, I can't find my mind. You know, and Bodhidharma looks at him and says, there, your mind is pacified. And so how the story goes is that this guy attains a sort of nirvana in that moment, or some days after, something of the sort. And realizes that the mind is not an object. And when we suffer from something that is non-physical, it has to do with how non-physically we have kept the physical. He realizes his mind that he has thought is suffering is not something that can break. Now, the reason I'm sharing this story with the viewers is so that to get a sense that the mind is not an object. The brain is an object. We're considering the brain to be the causal position, and we're considering the mind to be the effect and the projection of the brain. But what our brains are doing is non-physically administering reality, physical reality. Now, in the sense of my own observation, I have noticed pretty much that there is a relationship present in the moment for the conscious being of self and world. Because there's a body here, which is physical, a physical self, and then there's a location where the body can move in, a landscape, and we call that. So there's a physical self inside a physical world, or moving in a physical world. So consciousness seems to be initially the relationship of a self and a world. This is a very important idea to consider. And by the way, dear viewers, I don't know who you are, where you are listening from, but as a disclaimer, be mindful, there may be pauses, coughs, and then miscellaneous noises, so my apologies in advance, but life is way more important than our inconveniences. So anyways, I want to establish this idea that when consciousness activates through the human framework, it is activating through the notion of a physical self in a physical world at first. You know, when I look at human beings, we're a bunch of creatures on a rock spinning in the middle of nowhere, and to me it was very fascinating that I realized survival is self-obsession. And it's the self-obsession for the continuity of the force, of the intelligent force that is being the viewer. Now, when I say the mind is a world accessing technology, the main thing I realized, which I want to talk about in this episode, I keep pointing to it, but really what it is directly is that I ask myself, wait a minute, what if instead of a self, a physical self, being in a relationship with a physical world, it's a non-physical space having a relationship with a shaped world. So what I'm trying to say is that I have noticed simultaneously as I am being a body in the world, my mind is having a dualistic relationship with the world itself. It's kind of like, you know, how would I say it? It's like from one side of the coin, a self is in the world, but from other side of other side of the coin, it's an unknown viewer. It's pretty much space looking at the world before the matter in the world is noticing the space. Similar to many mystics and philosophers on this planet, I have been fascinated by the idea of greater dimensions and higher dimensions, but I noticed that in my process of thinking about greater dimensions, they're starting from the individual point of a self. And what I'm trying to convey in this episode is that I am starting to notice that the mind is a sort of intelligence or a sort of mechanism where it is the effect of it is individualism. But its actuality is kind of like, imagine, it's like a sphere of sight, and it's kind of like space is having a relationship with the world, with shape, prior to us being a specific shape having a relationship with the shape of the world in space. And it's like I'm saying that we think that the higher dimensions is like different rooms. Man goes to a higher dimension and everybody's body is made of light or whatever, right? The New Age community fathoms it this way. But for me, the mystery of consciousness is how an instantaneous presence is leading to a sort of dualistic persona to it's as if something is instantaneously being before we do anything to identify with anything to know what it is being. And so there is it's like we call ourselves human beings, but now I am seeing a sort of differentiation between the human and the being part. It's as if regardless of whatever I do in this life, there has been an awareness that notices life is happening. I am in some sense trying to point to how our intelligence is having a direct experiential relationship with the world prior to classifications in it, because the nature of the brain is that we're this little part of nature and the whole world appears chaotic to us and we are living in accordance to the order of our own mind. The ancient Greeks saw that the first god in their mythology was Kronos, and so then there was a Kronos spelled with a C rather than a K, and so it's like linearity slowly arose in the realm. Right, sometimes we can even attribute consciousness to how a specific spotlight, an unknown spotlight is shining on a limited area of a limitless event. This is the beautiful thing about the world. It is like some people are inspired by other people. But for me, I never thought, when I think about it, when I was young, when I was really young, I wanted to be a soccer player, and I was idolizing Ronaldinho and Quaresma and various soccer players, right? But little did I know that the most fascinated I would be in this life was to recognize that the limited has an opportunity to notice its limitation. It's another way of saying that most human beings wonder, why are we in this world and we're suffering, and they accept it as if it's a part of the program, not realizing suffering is the initiation to the opposite. We are here to experience inefficiency because efficiency is the intent. It's like the history books are all the history of a physical entity. But to wonder about the nature of the mind is to discover simultaneous being prior to any action done. So it's kind of like I'm this person who's like, wait a minute, I thought I was a human being on earth, and now I'm realizing I'm an event of mind. I am an instantaneous event of intelligence, and this event of intelligence could have a relationship with the world prior to a self in a world. In a strange book I wrote years ago called The Great Work, I had drawn this geometrical shape, and there was 3 points to this geometrical shape. And it was this idea that when I wondered about through what levels or through what angles of perception is the world kept, I realized there's fundamentally 3. There is the self, there is the world, and then there is others. But really what the world is in some sense all that is. We are having a relationship with ourself, we are having a relationship with others, and we're having a relationship with the world, and we take this to be one simultaneous event, but it could be perceived as 3 different ways life is happening. Just like we have 2 eyes that see the same, the mind could have 3 states where it's trying to be a creature in a world. It's trying to identify with something, Sometimes I ask myself, if religions never existed, what would the idea of divinity be like? And to me, divinity has become reversion into the original, as if there's something that never changed, but then there's many things that changed. And so when eyes open, the choice is made. Dear viewers, we are a species on a rock in the middle of nowhere in front of our eyes, but behind our eyes there is something going on, and we are like instances of worldhood, Movement requires individual consciousness, but being, the concept of being, is not something that requires individual consciousness, and the mysteries of greater dimensions may not be verb-oriented or noun-oriented. They may be just states of being. And states of being which are found in a limitless context. It's another way of saying we are being limited to realize that only the limitless is left. Socrates, this very profound philosopher, guided by the inner oracle. Socrates, sentenced by the old men of Athens, to be someone spreading around his own view on divinity at a time where divinity had a sort of strictness of gods walking on the clouds. Socrates was sentenced to drinking poison. And so as all his, disciples and whatnot, friends and, allies were there with him, right? It's as if Socrates, before he died, this isn't his last words, but he said something in the likes of, people asked him, Socrates, you mighty being, consciousness, you conscious beacon of the realm, where will you go after this life? And Socrates gives this remarkable answer, this remarkable speech, and it's his famous line, most philosophers know this, where Socrates says, I will either go somewhere where there is no Socrates, or I will go somewhere where all the answers to the questions I have wondered about will be answered. And mankind, as much as he chooses to have a romance with objects and subjects, we are in actuality seeking the truth that never can go anywhere. We are like creatures in a changing world, subconsciously being urged towards discovering the changeless. Because what does the idea of truth imply? What does the idea of the original imply? It's as if we want truth to be something that is static, that is constant. But the truth of an unknown world could be the unknown. It could be that the grandest and most advanced comprehension of any being in any world is to discover that the knowledge that it holds to hold the world perception through its perception. It's like we realize we are unknown beings before we named ourselves in the void. And there's a strange feeling to that, there's a strange feeling when the person's like, whoa, I'm not my name, I'm not my persona, I'm this presence of energy in a changing three-dimensional space-time continuum. We are in a world right now, and so the relationship of the mind with the world, the relationship of the mind with the self, and the relationship of the mind with all that is, this is what we're looking for. In this episode, the intent initially, I had this idea where I'm like, imagine this spacecraft, this extraterrestrial spacecraft, like crashed on Earth, and its parts were like scattered, right? And imagine somebody finding like this extraterrestrial spacecraft debris, right? Something advanced, but not complete. It's as if mankind doesn't have access to, let's say, complete advancement, but we have access to incomplete advancements. Like, that's worth something. So, if we treat the mind like a mechanism, that means if we treat the mind, which is the subjective sphere of, abstract movement of reality, I've written a sentence here, worlds are fuel for the workings of the mind. It's kind of like consciousness. Our bodies are consuming, let's say, elemental reality. We're like elemental beings, and our food is elemental. But when I think about the mind, consciousness, it's like this bizarre question, what does consciousness eat? What does consciousness consume? And what I have noticed is our minds are in the game of world simulation. It's like our body eats food and we have energy to move, and the mind takes sensory information and reprojects meaning. The idea of meaning is really, to some degree, an inner event. I think there was a very beautiful term for this, qualia. So it's kind of like imagine in front of your eyes, imagine there is a line, and the center of this line is the meridian, is like your eyes. And so in front of your eyes, there's an outer realm, there's an outer existential event taking place. But when a person closes their eyes and they have, let's say, they think or they imagine, visualize, or remember, that is an experiential event. An experiential event is taking place behind our eyes. An existential event is taking place in front of our eyes. When we see meaning in an object, that is the synchronization of an experiential event with an existential event. My fascination for this episode was like, okay, human beings are all looking at the consciousness as if it's this bizarre question mark. And there's even the Mysterian schools of thought that consider that some things can never be understood. But regardless, for me, the approach is like, okay, there is something happening, and life is a grand happening. Consciousness is an opportunity to watch how an unknown world moves. It's like accessing a free film, you know. Like some people have to pay, like let's say you have to pay for Netflix, right? But when you wake up in the morning, you don't have to pay to see the reality. You know, the instantaneous ability of consciousness to stabilize as self in world is just a fascinating opportunity. You know, really what we are on this planet is we are researchers. We are the researchers of the secrets behind our eyes and the strategies in front. So the nature of the mind is a very fascinating idea, and it cannot be owned by a story. This is something where in ancient times the idea of soul was there, the concept of the mind wasn't there that much, you know. People realized they were a soul in a world. People didn't have the idea of a mind. They hadn't bridged, you know, the mind to ideology yet. And it was pretty much divided between the experiencer and the experienced. Now, what I am realizing is that my whole sense of selfhood is based on the experienced. And so what is going on is that the event of nature, the event of existence, has an unknown cause. And it has a known effect, but our minds start from a known causal position. So the effect ends up being unknown. So it's kind of like a known effect of an unknown cause interpreting itself as a known cause of an unknown effect. The effect for mankind for now is really the future. You know, what it is ultimately it's an energetic event that is taking place. And energy doesn't necessarily need to have personality, but evidently through evolution it can. What evolution was how an object became a subject to itself. It's one of the most beautiful, remarkable, mysterious events in nature. That means the most fascinating thing that happened in this world was that there was something to notice it. That's the beauty of the mind. The mind is a space where sensory information has a home for a limited time. You know, we are housing perception, we're housing viewpoints, and we are housing them in accordance to the rules of our own intelligence, of our own vision. Now, something incredible about realizing the world is unknown, regardless of you seeing it in the causal position or the position of the effect, is that when the world is unknown, at least the person has an opportunity to know it. Right now, if there was a specific truth to life and everybody knew that specific truth, life would lose its beauty. You know, it's like there is a deep urge within the human being to overcome its circumstances, but if it had overcome all its circumstances, it would be a creature that wouldn't know what to value. And so what I find, there's this ancient story, I'll share it with the viewers. It's a story of this of this avatar of God called Rama in India. And so Rama was seen as the archetype of the perfect man, and in Vedic culture, in Indian culture. And so somebody comes up to Rama and says, Rama, why do I have to work for my enlightenment? Why do I have to do something? It's like, I'm a lazy person. I don't want to work for enlightenment. It's like, why do I have to work for enlightenment? Or imagine the person's like, I'm too busy to meditate, buddy. And so Rama tells the guy something very fascinating to an interdimensional context, and he says, to be a human being and to wonder about the nature of the truth is such a rare privilege, such an incredible privilege, because in lesser dimensions, entities are less conscious. They're not conscious of the question, they're unconsciously functioning. And in greater dimensions, there's such pure consciousness that it's as if Rama is saying, in lesser dimensions, the beings can't ask the question of enlightenment. And in greater dimensions, the gods are receiving so many offerings that they don't need to ask the question. And it is only in this unique airport of karma, let's say, it's like the earth plane is a very unique, it's like only on earth you can work for a truth that you don't earn because the past authorizes you, but you earn because energetically the being is present as it. When I say the mind is a world accessing technology, it's as if the activation of the mind is dependent on the information it receives, but the information it receives is being categorized, it's being filtered. Really what it is just like a sculptor would look like. Michelangelo has this quote where he says, I saw the angel in the stone and I set it free. Right, so it was like this chunk of rock, no angel, no sculpture, but Michelangelo saw the sculpture within that meaningless reality and sculpted it out, So similarly, when it comes to mystical inquiry into the nature of reality, we are actually looking at an unknown an unknown event. And so what is happening is that consciousness is accessing an unknown movement and using its own familiarized movements to somehow interpret, to somehow sculpt meaning out of something that is meaningless. So what I'm trying to say is that the mind has activated in accordance to the type of world it has accessed, in accordance to the world it has accessed. And right now, for human beings, in 2022, we are looking at an unknown, changing world, and life is a dynamic. It's like life is a verb, and people are seeking truth like a noun. So I am this person who's like, okay, my body has a sort of relationship with the physical world. But when I ask myself what is moving my body, it comes to the idea of myself. But when I ask who is aware of the idea of me before I am the idea of me, and that awareness seems to be directly experiencing the world prior to any categorization. That means the brain is disguising itself in individualism because the collectivism was meaningless to it. But what consciousness has done is create the capability to not only turn the unknown into a map, it's kind of like our consciousness is consuming shape to remove itself to as a sort of reshaped version, right? It's like eyes open, world is there, eyes move in the world has specifications of meaning. So whoever you are listening to me, if you're a human being who's wondering about how do you activate ability on this earth, the ability has to do with not the conceptual relationship of yourself with the world, but the contextual, the context. This is the secret to mastery, that when one finds confidence in the context of reality, any concept can arise, and they will be fearless. So this is what I have noticed, regardless of whatever ideological system there is out there, before we are creatures that clothe ourselves in language, we were creatures directly experiencing sensory information before we had categorized the sensory information. And really where individualism comes from is individualism as concentration. In ancient meditative practice, they had this view where it was pretty much single pointedness. Like people were so fascinated by the idea of a truth beyond their world that a lot of these yogis and sages were like, there's nothing else other than this truth, and I will meditate my whole life. I will have a single pointed concentration on the nature of this absolute truth, of this unhindered truth. Right, so what I'm trying to say is that the nature of our intelligence is that we are looking out of our eyes. We are unknown before we claim ourselves as known. And this unknown attention, this unknown viewer of this knowable world, has an ability to focus on a singular point or multiple points, or it can choose to go within, and when it goes within, it cannot ignore how space is being it. When I was younger, I remember I think I was like 10, 11 or something. I had found this book. I had bought this notebook that its casing looked like somebody had just printed a picture of wood. Do you know? So it was like the picture of wood on the sides of this notebook, where it felt like a wooden notebook, but visually, optically, you know. And so I remember this notebook when I was younger. I would open it up and I would draw designs, and I would, in my own, youthful mind, try to invent stuff, right? And I had this view that an invention was fascinating. I not articulated in this sense, but to me, novelty had a mysterious accessing to it, right? It was as if to me, an inventor creating something new was creating a value that had never been there before, right? But what I realized is that because it's an unknown world, the inventionism, even though it's taking place in an event of mind, what I'm trying to say is that there is new things we can build, objects. There's the discovery of new ways of new objects, or let's say new elements of the periodic table or whatever, right? But then there is a discovery of new ways that the mind holds the reality it behaves in. And what I'm trying to do is trying to get a species to unshackle itself from how its suffering and its emotions are just based on the past. It's like, imagine, an alien invaded. Imagine there was a mental alien invasion on Earth, like one of those alien horror movies where there's aliens on people's heads or whatever, right? But imagine now, instead of that being an alien invasion, it seems to be that people are possessed by their past. And so when I wonder about the value of an unknown world, it's kind of like, why does my past matter if the present is unknown? You see, the concept of time organized us, but it also shackled us to our order. So if I was to polish, the lines of reasoning I have for what I'm telling the viewers, it's pretty much, I'm noticing that at first it's like something known interacts, moving in an unknown world, but when this creature that thinks it's a known thought, begins to realize that how its mind moves is an imbued unknown quality of the space of their being. That means not all of our abilities are like the person has to work hard to access. It's more like through what context are you being, where the permission is already granted. Years ago, I remember I was giving a talk and I was in Edwards Gardens. To me, that place is like a holy place. I've had profound experiences there. And I remember once I was giving a talk, and in the talk I began speaking something, and it was like I heard an alarm in my intuition, as if poetically this inner voice was telling me it's unauthorized what you're speaking about, And so I shifted the conversation away from that topic, But what I'm trying to tell you is that there's ways that reality can be, and there's ways that reality is already being. And the challenge of man's mind is, how does he believe? How does he interact as a psychological entity with the physiological movement? Because if the mind is not considered an object, our understanding of change is based on how an object moves in space. But how do we understand a subject moving in space? And the way we are accessing that is through, where is consciousness when the world arises, when the world is here. So many people in the New Age community, they go to these so-considered enlightened gurus, and the enlightened gurus are like, yeah, everybody, thanks for buying the tickets. We're all oneness, and we're all just present in the here and now, and nature never needed an opinion, And people are like, yeah, thanks, enlightened master, for telling us we're all here and now, right? But it's as if there's deeper mysteries of the psychology, that how can we be content as an ideological entity when every night we sleep, we experience moments of deep sleep where there is the absence of experience. We are identifying as psychological entities, but in deep sleep the psychology is not there and reality continues. That means there is a mysterious relationship of how existence is experiencing, and then there's a mysterious relationship of how experience cannot, in some sense, existence exists beyond experience. Right? The more you are a materialistic entity, existence is matter is hilariously eternal. Matter is like particles, that like atoms have a sort of immortality to them. Who was it? Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, very important people to know about. They had said that it's like the same. We're all stardust, and this stardust has an antiquity to it, And so what I'm trying to say is that it's like when a person truly becomes materialistic, they begin to realize matter is behaving like an immortal. And so mortality is, I don't know how to say it, but it's like we're riding the waves of our consciousness, and our biological body is the surfboard, and the waves are how the whole cosmos and the karma of the moment is happening. the mysteries of experiencing mind beyond the body, it's to some degree realize that for consciousness, the immediate self in the world is the main actor. You know, it's as if your whole life you have been the main actor of all the journey, the film of your own eyes, right? And mysticism and spirituality is realizing that you are not the main character. Why? Because there is states that are irrelevant to the setting. There's ways the world is moving that is unobservable, because it's not that how shape is, it is what is moving shape, right? The concept of movement and stillness in greater dimensions is like absent, you know. It's kind of like time is the privilege of our lack of knowing the true nature of reality. Time is that beautiful illusion, you know, giving purpose to creatures that are like, what do we do with all this empty space that is being left? I feel that the species is headed for a very huge realization that intelligence prior to humanization it's kind of like we're this unknown, how do I say it? People are going to get bored of being objects and subjects in a time span of 100 to 200 years, okay? Or it could happen much sooner. And when this happens, the moment that we are not individuals, the structure, the way civilization is maintained shifts. You know, that means when we look at human civilization, it's a civilization coordinated to individuals. Right, but when the individual no longer feels individual, what would the implication of a civilization be? That means the person's like, okay, you know, the world makes sense to my body, but what does the world mean to my mind? And hilariously, our access to reality is the reality. You know, it's kind of like my stomach has been, you know, digesting food this whole time, and my mind has been organizing information. And it's as if the body, it's like the mind is trying to, it's like why, it's like you're wondering about how survival makes sense, you know. If life is based on its suffering, survival doesn't, you know, sure, the way we make survival make sense is we're like, we gotta overcome our challenges. You know, the human species is a badass, it's gonna get through everything, you know? But what I am realizing is that I was fascinated by how I was present in the world. But now I have come to be fascinated how the world is a presence before I was born. You know, man, that's kind of like, you know, like time is a giant and we're on its shoulder for a little while. And what shall we whisper in this giant's ear? You know, I thought that an advanced civilization was just this view that, how do I say it, like it was a physical construction. It was the most advanced science project of an evolutionary animal. The greatest science project. The advanced civilization is, you know, one of the greatest ideas ever known to the human mind, because it is the victory of our future, you know. But victory against what? Against the ignorance of dimensions, right? That means right now people are fighting over truth, but in the future people are going to be like, what other way can our eyes find meaning in the world. We say there is freedom of speech, but it's like people don't realize without freedom of thought, what freedom of speech? Without an ability to wonder about how the system has an unknown implication or connotation as much as a known implication. That means all the teachers in the educational system have lied, and they have lied because they have ignored that the unknown has been present the whole time. You see, that's the nature of the ego. It has to forget, that there was something before it in order to move the moment. There is a greatness to how intelligence is activating in this realm that surpasses an individual's mind. That means what I'm pretty much telling the viewers is that all the efforts and expeditions of knowledge are going to notice that the unknown is here, and to value the unknown experientially is spiritual. What spirituality, mysticism is. To value the unknown ideologically is conceptual knowledge. So this species is utilizing, it is a system, it is a biological system that has voluntary and involuntary levels to it, right? But simultaneously, we are being creatures in a narrative. That means if somebody's like, who's this person giving this talk right now? It's like you're seeking a story, right? But what I am telling you is that we were never stories, but we told them. The species has displayed a sophisticated ability in language worship. It was as if we didn't just put clothes on our, naked skin. We also put language on our naked mind. And so everybody is clothed in language, and I think, really what enlightened beings are, they are, if language was clothing, they are nudists, it's like a recognition that your expectation based on your limited sensory information is trying to fathom the limitless, but it is in the absence of the limitation that the limitless is experientially realized. That means you cannot ideologically be a limitless being, but you can experientially realize before the concept of limitation, what was the moment being. It's like the great question that a species, on a rock in the middle of space, it's as if, should it fear the unknown or should it be fascinated by it? And when I was younger, I wish I had known that fascination was the overcoming of my fear. The most advanced state of intelligence on this planet is an intelligence so fascinated by reality that the past is honorably being listened to, but it is not. The past, is if the past repeats, then what was the point of the new? It's like right now on the planet, do we need all human beings to behave the same way as our ancestors said, or do we need every human being to truly be a human being that has never existed, right? We think that it is in the common denominator that is maintaining human agreement is commonality of our perspective on reality, but in actuality the unknown is the greatest common denominator, and those who realize the unknown suddenly realize why compassion is a genius strategy. I could say compassion was like evolution fulfilling itself. Because for how long should we fear something that we don't know? That's the nature of the world, Sometimes I wonder about what am I afraid of, and it becomes humorous to me that I could be afraid of so many things that I don't even know they exist, And so, of course, as the Buddha says, you're born alone and you die alone, and everything in the middle is, a blessing. Perhaps a good question to wonder about is, I'm thinking, okay, let's say somebody has heard what I've said so far. Then the view comes like, okay, Mr. Within, so you're saying one side of the coin, it's a physical self experiencing a physical world. And then the other side of the coin, it's like the whole moment, which is a space of awareness. It's just interacting with the world itself. It's kind of like consciousness is being world and consciousness is being self, but these are not the same dimension. There are two overlaid dimensions. And so my fascination is like, okay, let's say my mind, even though it's not an object, it can't be a physical machine, but let's say it was a machine to a higher dimension, right? Let's say a square looks at a machine and then looks at the mind and says the mind isn't a machine, but a cube knows it's a machine, imagine. So in treating the mind as a machine, pretty much the fascination for what a mechanism is that we human beings, it wasn't enough to just see something happening. We wanted to know how is it happening, and we wanted to know how it is happening to actually recenter our own reality. Everybody is living in their own world, and their own world is living in the actual world. Technically a mind is a simulation of Earth. It is not the actual Earth. Our minds are the nature of the activity of the brain. Brain is a simulation, but that mankind is inside a simulation is a different story. It has to do with worldhood. This is the clue I'm working with. Sometimes when I give these talks, just pretty much every day of my life, I feel I'm a researcher of what I am and what the moment is. And there's views that I am the moment, and there's more views that the I is not the moment. The more I move my physical body, the easier it is to be an individual, but the more I just sit in stillness, it's like nothing has moved yet. The inner effort, which becomes the intent of the psyche, hasn't even projected, right? So what do we do? So if the mind was a machine, I'm like, okay, what's the purpose of this machine? Forget who created it. What is the function of the mind? That means in an unconscious physical evolution, that means we were just stuff in space. But why did this stuff become capable to itself? Right? For me, creaturehood is one of the biggest mysteries of space and energy. How did something that was just being become a specific doer to itself? Based on what the mind is created, the potential is there. And, we could be trying to relate personality to neurology, right? But the interface, I'm pretty much treating like my body as, or just for a moment considering not the body, the mind as, okay, the mind is the interface, the mind is the software, the body is the hardware, and who is using the software? It's like discovering the nature of the human perception is in accordance to desire egotistically. And so wondering why is there a desire, or what is actually in the moment desiring. Let's say you're someone who is seeking happiness, or whatever you're seeking, or whatever problem you're trying to solve. Mysticism is when we ask who is trying to solve this problem. So it has to do that the value of a mechanism also has to do with who is looking at it, and in what way are we looking at it. And it's in some sense, if the mind was a machine, okay, this machine is converting meaningless sensory image into meaningful reality. The mind, it's like our brains are converting image into life. They're converting information into movement. This world is so fascinating that it continues regardless of what we do. That's the power of existence. Existence is like this next level inventor, endlessly creating inventions. And we are like the friends of this inventor, trying to get the attention of this inventor. But this inventor is so absorbed in its own work, right, that it's as if man cannot speak to nature, but you can bring iced tea for the inventor, right? Or man can salute the original presence of nature being a worldly being. We can even say the mind accesses the world to engage with it. And it's kind of like our body is like the hunter archetype, bringing food to the tribe, and the mind is the tribe, poetically speaking, or metaphorically speaking. The mind notice there's something about the mind. Excuse me. There's something about our intelligence in the moment that, just like a swordsman uses a sword and knows that its arm is not the sword and can let go of the sword, similarly, when it comes to what the meaning of the moment has to be, the attention can hold endless simulations. The brain, it's like more than us looking for a location or an image or like some film of truth. We're coming to realize, okay, what is happening prior to the consequence. And to me, this might be one of the most intense or fascinating ideas I have come across. But the moment I realized I am observing my sense of personhood prior to moving as it or being it and whatnot, it's as if we are the fascinating implication of being an unknown witness to the whole moment. It's as if we are the eyes of another dimension peeking through this dimension. And it's like we think that extraterrestrials are these creatures beyond the clouds, not realizing that there are extraterrestrial dimensions of being. You see, when it comes, the question mark is the alien for the world of the exclamation point. one thing we know about how if the mind had a mechanism, it happens, is that the mind individualizes. It's as if we are this attention that knows that the body has limited energy. So, in order to resolve the issue of how much energy goes to what throughout the day, we establish truth so we could repeat life. That's the power of novelty. Novelty is the new. The new is the divine. Because familiarity is just based on the past. So I am just waiting to see how 8 billion creatures physically in some prototype of civilized, in the first prototype of civilization 1.0 I call it, how these 8 billion creatures respond to their external world, and how they respond to their internal world, and what would be the greatest conclusion. Right now there's I would say there's like just like in mathematics there was the millennium questions, in the future, if I how would I say it, if I like have a privilege, to have incredible amounts of money, right? What I would do is create the millennium questions for philosophy, and what that means is the millennium questions, anybody who solves it gets $1 million. It's for the mathematical. They're these mathematical problems that anybody solves gets $1 million. But at the same time, right, I am seeing questions about the nature of reality, and I am seeing that human beings will have two sorts of enlightenment. It's like first you're in an outer world and you realize there's something beyond the outer world, then you realize your inner world, and then you realize that there's something beyond your inner world. And usually the most honest position is and this is for anybody who is seeking spirituality, the most honest position is that you notice it's moving in an unknown way, and rather than man seek, it's like the questioner breaks before the world breaks. Before, it's like truth dissolves the questioner before the questioner can have an answer to truth. The seeker. When it comes to our inner realms, we have had great generals in history, and for man's mind and the linguistic simulation, we have and we will have many great advanced communicators. And what this means is that the advanced communicator is pretty much a being that is trying to honestly see all the dimensions that are present, but also noticing the capabilities of each dimension, and then their interactionism. That means it's not just that you learn the letters of the alphabet and that's enough, but then you also learn their placement beside one another. And so the same sophistication we have in language, the mind is kind of described experiencing as if you're a pilot in a spaceship and you're seated somewhere, and the interface that interacts with you is in some sense the power of your mind. That means the mind can become an ally equivalent to for me, this is the kind of futuristic poetry that my mind moves towards. But to me, the ability of human minds is to become Jarvis in Iron Man. Right, in the Iron Man movie, Jarvis was this program, and the program was making all the calculations for Tony Stark, right? That means what was more genius than Tony Stark was that he had created something that was picking up on all the blind spots. So what I'm trying to say is that it's the interface. A person's mind is how the story they tell themselves is becoming the software to their biological body. You know, true mysticism is wondering who is playing. Like, how are you a player in a game of the world? Like, that's pretty much, the beginning of mysticism. So many yogis have said it, but really, how spirituality begins is not somebody tells you, yo, go be spiritual, man. It's not something like that. It's more like the person realizes that there is something they don't know, and there is still something to know. This is why I feel the species will never be content with materialism as long as it has imagination. Imagination is like the transcendental opposite of reality. For me, I have simplified it pretty much. I don't even have this view anymore that I'm like this spiritual being. I have this view that I am this unknown pilot, and I had this unknown attention to the moment, this unknown awareness to phenomena is seated. I am like an unknown pilot, and this unknown attention is piloting my biological body and my mind, and it's not an archetype. That means that there's something, before Carl Jung was born, that was happening here. Before Jungian ideas were born. That means I don't know how to say it, but it's kind of like, it's like the person thinking they are their memories, then noticing that they are aware of multiple memories. So how can they just be a memory? How can we be a thought when we have access to multiple thoughts? It's ridiculous. The world has been fooled by language, not realizing that, we can convert the foolishness of our ignorance into the efficiency of the future. For me, I asked myself, okay, let's say the world was a bad place, how do we make it a good place? Like I thought about this idea. And then I realized that there's so many dimensions, there's so many things happening here, that by just being a character in a story, we cannot access. So what I have realized is that the species is still inside a cave. That means evolution was how we stepped out of a cave. But when it comes to our minds, we are inside the cave that is made of language. We are inside a cave story. A story is like a cave where this unknown attention is still in, right? And when it steps out of this cave, it accesses a different space. The expansion of consciousness has to do with how the attention. It has to do with the freedom of the attention in more of space. It kind of feels like what the mind feels like. If somebody asks me, Mr. Within, how does your mind feel? Just like its dynamic movements, the inner realms, like the way I experience imagination is that it doesn't matter if my eyes are open or closed. It is a plane. It's like a film screen where there's films moving. Right? And it's kind of like the sophistication of our brains and how much we still don't know in what advanced ways the brain is processing reality. So the mind is the fascinating mystery that our lives have come not to solve a problem, but to explore the ability of the realm. The idea of an advanced civilization, it's the fearless embrace of advancement. That means if there was an opportunity, imagine, or how would I say it? If let's say let's say we created some next level AI, right? Or there's some, or let me make it this hypothetical setting where, let's say, this is a supreme enlightened extraterrestrial, or let's say some sort of avatar of God came down to Earth, and it was asking all human beings, what do you want? Imagine this extraterrestrial helper came out. Maybe this is a safer way, or better way to maybe talk about it, right? Imagine this extraterrestrial in the future came down to Earth, and this enlightened Andromedan, this extraterrestrial from the Andromedan galaxy came to Earth in the future. Let's say like in 500 years or something, right? And this extraterrestrial came and asked humanity, it's like, what can I help you with, right? And imagine if somebody asked this hypothetical story, this Andromedan extraterrestrial, hey man, can you show us what the most advanced version of civilization would look like? Or can you create the most advanced civilization of this, let's say, compassionate, capable extraterrestrial from the Andromedan galaxy that was like, I don't know, just pure light blue, glowing and whatnot. To me, if there was an option of an advanced civilization, some part of me would instantly go there. Because when I think about what the value of normal reality is, it's just the format. That means really what advanced civilization and how an advanced civilization comes about is when how advanced the being is acknowledging itself, right? Because really people talk about confidence thinking it's just an emotional thing. It's about vision, and when there's certainty in vision, actions can easily follow. I have this sort of metaphysical relationship with my own poetically spoken spirit, with my own mind and metaphysics, and the way it is that my body is like a soldier, my mind is like a commanding officer, and poetically my soul is like the general that is watching the battlefield, not in the battlefield, right? The soldiers, the body is in the battlefield, the body is in the physical dimension, and the mind is behind the body, watching, right? And really what the mind is it is how the changing film of stories also translates as instruction and command. So the mind is really the commander archetype. It's like every person is secretly their own great commander. They're the great one of them. It's like every person's intelligence is command oriented. And it's kind of like our bodies end up becoming the commands of design of the DNA. The commands of the DNA. What I'm trying to say is the mind activates in accordance to the world you access, but based on what you see yourself as it's kind of like your mind is waiting for, it's hilarious, it's like a subjective version of ourselves as consciousness is waiting for the biology to do something so it can do something. It's like to be a human being is to be an interdimensional moment, to be a multidimensional moment, and we as a species have ignored this, just limiting ourselves to duality. That means for how long are people just going to be good and bad people? When will we realize that there's as many dimensions fathomable as we're capable of fathoming? The secrets of the world are not bound by the past. The greatest thing that the past of every human being could be is momentum. That means if you've lived a good life, your life has a sort of momentum to it. If you've lived a bad life, it's like the momentum is different. Because on some level, we're all privately having a relationship with how the world treats us. How karma happens. So wonder about your perception, whoever you are. Realize that, sure, we act like human beings, in a human world. But that's just because sound and symbolism are being taken more seriously than how we are actually an unknown viewer of an unknown reality. And it's such an incredible feeling. It's an incredible feeling when the person realizes something is happening here that nobody knows. And if you were into Mysterianism, it's like nobody can ever know. So we are in the presence of, like, every person's moment has unknown variables and known variables. And it's the relationship of these. When I am reading a book, it's like I'm not like I'm not like an unknown being. But when I stare at the edge, try to find the edge of the sky, I am as unknown as where my attention goes. The mind is an ability. Free will is how much of the ability, this unknown witness that is attention being simultaneously existence. It's like your mind can access reality based on how it has chosen to access previous realities. Before mathematics, life was an instantaneous mystery. But the moment the idea of two, mathematically that concept came to existence. Right, that was when human beings were like, our memories are like a file cabinet. The files are all in sequence. I'm waiting for that day where all the educational systems on the planet, or all schools for children, are like the teacher gives them an assignment as if what is your most advanced vision on reality? To build an advanced civilization is not one way. It's kind of like the ability of nature is that there's many flowers in the garden, not just one. And so it's like when I give this talk and I talk about the world, it's like I'm one angle, 1 in 8 billion. Imagine 8 billion angles and 8 billion types of earth behind people's eyes. And that means each person being their own angle and view to the world. It's like there's something about how we are intelligently noticing ourselves that seems to be an instantaneous being prior to any sort of dualistic movement interpreting. That means it's kind of like truth never went anywhere. It was just that the simulation separated itself from truth. It's like an iceberg, or imagine the tip of the iceberg being like, yo, is life just what I'm seeing on the surface, not realizing behind our eyes, as much as we're being human beings, we're also being the presence of the universal sector. True abilities of man's mind, do they activate, or even this he does, or see, there's two approaches to power. One is personalized, the other is impersonal. In yogic and Vedic thought and in meditation, right, these sadhus and these yogis, right, or shamans, or just pretty much the archetype is similar in all cultures, right? But what it is that the person would go away from the crowd, right, and they would go into pure isolation. And isolation and loneliness are different because isolation is consciously selected. Isolation is like selective loneliness, you know. And the person would go into the state where their mind would slowly revert from an unnatural image oriented and unnatural concept, from being an unnatural concept to just being being just present with nature. That presence with nature, that ability to just be present as your world, not as something in it that has to do something, but just being here. The person realizes what they were suffering from is an opportunity for their freedom. That means if they were a free being, their suffering would be an opportunity. But because people think they are not free and they have to become free, they're searching, they're living for an abstract view, like all people on earth who say, like, I want to, live a happy life. What does that mean? What does that mean? When in some sense, it's like the happiness is an event of mind. That means anytime your mind is capable of perceiving something you want, the person there's a sort of instantaneous happiness. What I'm trying to say is that we are these existential beings living for mental events of our mind, not realizing that when it comes to the nature of the mind, it's kind of like the body is in time, the mind is generating, or consciousness is holding the idea of time. And so what I'm trying to say is that our imagination is the authorization of movement beyond the limits of reality. Our mind is here to show us we can never just be the body. Life is a coin, and one side is unknown and one side is known. And that's where everybody is starting from. What is truth but an opportunity to discover the nature of how everything is being in the middle of nothing? All our happiness and fascination, we are like, a fantasy. It's a human psychology is like fiction, and if we want to be a pure materialist, it's like the body is science, is non-fiction. Right, so it's kind of like a fictional brain simulated character projects a vision of itself in the future, and when it thinks it is that vision in the outer realms, it feels like it is achieved. But in reality, it's like the person wants to understand the world to such a level where they realize what their attention is standing under. Do you know? It's like there's something about just the archetype of individualism, that any sort of advancement of the individualism would become an awareness that is collective. We are the greatness of the potential of the world, just chilling, in space. We are greatness is life. That means we're not just living as, let's say, good and bad human beings, or we're not just trying to live as advanced beings, as advanced human beings, but it's just that the world, it's like what a force is the intent, it's the motivation of how shape changes. And so when we can pattern it, we think it's from an intelligent being. But if we see it instantaneously, it's like without two moments to compare, there is no meaning to the singularity. That means the concept of God, due to being inconceivable, does not exist in conception. So when man tries to worship the idea of God, he is actually creating a partner to the inconceivability of the direct experience, right? Because what is faith? An ability to let the moment be. And when we can let the moment be, we become the witness of the greatness of divinity. So wonder about what sort of world is activating your mind, and as you discover the mystery of reality, you will become one of those beings on this earth was not lying linguistically about an unknown event. It's like we're unknown beings in an unknown movement of an unknown world. And knowledge is the privilege of our condition and circumstance. But if we notice the nature of the attention is, if there's even any probability that there is, our attention is not just in this dimension. It's as if, it's like fearing somewhere you're not. After some point, eternity never forgot. Thanks for listening. Much blessings and namaste. Rise, mankind, rise.